After hearing about our relaxed approach to education, parents can wonder, what about testing? What is the best way to prepare my child for the test? And how do I not transfer my anxiety about the results to them? We're covering all of that and more in today's episode. You're listening to the Homeschool Made Simple podcast. This is a podcast to help you homeschool simply, inexpensively, and enjoyably. Carole Joy Seid has been helping families homeschool for several decades now, and I'm Rachel Winchester, a fellow homeschool mom using this method with my own 3 kids. In this episode, Carole and I answer your common questions about testing. Listen in. Today, we're going to talk about a topic we get some questions on every so often about test taking, and especially in the realm of standardized tests. We know some states require different levels of standardized testing and stuff. So I just wanted to pick your brain on the topic today, Carole.
Yeah, that's really a good question, Rachel, and not one that I think about a lot because most states do not require testing. But there are a few, and those families get a lot of gray hair, I think unnecessarily, but I'd love to talk about it. Where do we start?
Yeah, so I guess we could start with standardized tests. If somebody is in a state where they have to do standardized tests, I know a friend of mine lives in North Carolina, and I think she has to test every year. How do you, if somebody has to test, I guess maybe let's talk about the younger kids, before they can read or before they're like very good readers. What do you recommend families do if they have to do a standardized test?
So I don't have a lot of experience with this because I've never lived in a state where this was required. But I glean so much from my families because you're all experts. So many of my families have been very happy with the Peabody test, which does not penalize a child for not reading. And so if you're in that in-between stage between when your child can read like they went to Harvard versus they can't read at all, which is what a lot of our families are. It's a short stage, but usually there's a couple years there. The Peabody test, you're reading it to the child. And so it just puts them on an equal footing with, a reading child. So that would be a great test to look into. Also, a couple little caveats about testing in general with these states. First of all, I would make your child the oldest one in their grade. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to do that at church or you have to do that when they graduate. They can graduate whenever you want them to graduate. But legally, to make them the oldest child in their classification puts the pressure, I should say it takes the pressure off of you because now they're a genius first grader, but they would have been a struggling second grader.
Right.
So for legal purposes, that's always a little secret. And then there's something else I was going to tell you, and now I've lost my train of thought, but keep asking me a question.
So if, because we tell people to start first grade when their child is 7.
That's right.
So then it kind of gives you a leg up in a sense because, okay, most other people would be starting their kid maybe when they're 6 or, so they're older or on the older side so that then they get that advantage of that learning.
And I thought of what I wanted to tell you. This has nothing to do with what we're just talking about this minute, but what Dr. Moore used to say.
Mm-hmm.
He used to say to us, don't even, now, in states where this is legally required and you have no choice, you have to play the game a little bit. And I will talk to that in a minute. But Dr. Moore used to say, don't even think about giving your child a standardized test if you have a choice until they're at least like 10, 4th grade, that type of thing. Because he would say to us, or I use the analogy, it's like taking a loaf of bread out of the oven when it's only half baked. And so standardized testing when a child is still in the concrete phase of thinking is just going to be a no-win situation. So, that's one option. Just waiting as long as you can, stalling them as long as you can. But then let's just talk about standardized testing in general and who tests best. So based on Ruth Beechick's study and research, she was a real pioneer in the homeschool movement. In her book, she talks about children who have never taken, let's say, a grammar class or filled in a workbook page in grammar or maybe even spelling or vocabulary. Things that, standardized testing supposedly is going to test you on. But what Ruth would say is they may test you on that, but a child who's never taken a vocabulary test or a spelling test or any of these kind of busy worky things, studied grammar in
Mhm.
those early years, but a child who's been read to by the hour in utero until the day they get married will knock the socks off of, let's say, a Stanford test,
Mhm.
Ruth said, because a child who's been read to has a trained ear. So a Stanford test will ask you a question like, which of these sentences is not correct or which sentence is correct, however they word it. And
Mhm.
Ruth said, a reader will know that. A non reader will not. And she said, you could be doing grammar from morning until night with your child, but a reader will know the answer to that question and a non reader will not.
Mhm.
And so many of the things that we worry about with standardized testing actually are moot points. Another thing, Rachel, is that in, let's say, Minnesota, I believe I'm not an expert on each state, but I believe it's Minnesota, where you don't have to even show your results unless they're below a certain really like red level of
Okay.
disaster. And even if you do show them, sometimes they just kind of keep their eye on you, but there's not a big punitive result of it. But homeschool children test across the board on standardized testing approximately 30 to 35% higher than private and public school peers. So homeschool children test very well. And the reason is because homeschool children tend to be read to and tend to be more literary themselves.
Mhm.
So, laying awake nights about standardized testing, I always like to tease families worry about the ozone layer more than this because it's just not an issue because homeschool children test so well,
Mhm.
generally speaking. Now, there are truant people who call themselves homeschoolers,
Right.
and but even those kids very often shock everybody and turn out brilliantly because they're unschooled, even though their mother doesn't even know the term. They're, but they really are. And so they're inventing things in their backyards that are genius level, So I don't worry too much about homeschoolers. I'm not now, if you're using screens, I worry about you. Like
Mhm.
that's different. See that I don't consider that a child who's being raised with my methodology. So
Yeah.
that would be very much opposed to what I teach. And I think you're cutting the feet off of yourself when you're using screens in your home and wondering why your child, for example, doesn't want to read, doesn't
Mhm.
has no interest in books. Well, who would if Walt Disney can come and babysit them for 4 hours a day? I wouldn't want to read a book either. I'd just turn on another screen, another video, another whatever it is, another stream. And so I just feel like if you do what we teach, your children will test very, very well.
Mhm.
That's the only thing I can stand by. I
Mhm.
can't answer the other methods.
Yeah. I'm also thinking about in the Read Aloud Handbook when Jim Trelease talks about the principle of like just if children read, if their children are read to, then they're introduced to so many words, and so their vocabulary is like exponentially larger than children who are not read to. And so
Yes.
then how they have this advantage that just continues to grow and grow and grow. And I feel like that also has to come in play because they're not coming across they're most likely familiar, at least have heard what they're reading about or whatever they're being asked to do. They probably have the vocabulary to have experience with it, to not be like confused about what is being referred to even,
Mhm.
but just they have such a larger vocabulary to begin with, they're more likely to understand the question or the content in and of itself.
Yes. So a lot of families, take logic classes and things like that, which I've, nothing against at all. I love the idea. But I feel that reading great books naturally teaches you how to think logically. So you're in Solzhenitsyn's mind or Charles Dickens or Jane Austen or Henry James and these people and their high level thought becomes your high level thought. You model who you're exposed to. and you become like that person, and you start thinking like Jane Austen. Wouldn't that be wonderful? So it's so natural. Instead of using a textbook trying to create these things,
Mhm.
great books do it painlessly while your children are reading under the covers with a flashlight or begging for one more chapter.
Mm.
This is a dream come true. This is education that is so joy filled instead of so traumatic and dry and
Mhm.
deadly.
Mhm. It's intuitive
That's
instead
right.
of, like, forcing something to happen. It becomes intuitive because it's just those books pattern onto them, and so they start to, especially if they keep listening or reading them over and over again, the ones they especially like, they'll really imbibe that way of thinking or the character development, all those things will
Mhm.
really leave a mark, even if it's not articulated to someone. It
Yeah.
still is doing its work on them.
Exactly. And that's also why listening to audiobooks in addition to being read to, because mommy and daddy's voice only lasts so long, but combining that with, some audiobooks that are read, because sometimes if a child is just reading to themselves and not being read to, they'll start to see words that they don't know how they're pronounced.
Mm.
Like, I have funny little stories of when JJ was a little boy. He talked about Cheos one time, and we were like, "What's Cheos?" It was chaos. And, but he was pronouncing it as it was written,
Right.
or negligee, or things like that, because he'd read these old English novels or whatever, and
Mhm.
and that word would be used, not what we think of as a negligee today, like from Victoria's Secret, but it like that meant like an at-home gown, that a woman in Victorian times would wear and stuff. And he had seen that word, but he didn't know because he hadn't heard it read. So a lot of times children will get to an age where they don't want to be read to because they can read so fast, and but push through that. Don't let them just say, "Oh well, I guess we're done with that." Not at all. I've
Mm.
never been an adult that didn't love to be read to. So just say, "Well, that's okay, you can read that one to yourself, but this one we're going to read as a family, and there's going to be all hands on deck for this book. It's too important for you to read by yourself." So
Mhm.
finding that balance.
Yes. Are you ready to jump in and learn more about the Homeschool Made Simple approach? We've bundled our essential teachings together to create the HMS Essentials Bundle. In it, we'll teach you everything you need to know about our approach from the elementary years through high school graduation. This bundle includes 4 key audio resources: a return to our roots of greatness, a literature-based approach to education, begin with the end in mind, and the homeschooling interview. The HMS Essentials Bundle will help you set a solid foundation for homeschooling simply, inexpensively, and enjoyably in every season of life. And the more than 20 pages of book lists will point you toward the resources that we love. Use coupon code PODCAST at checkout to receive 15% off your order. Visit our online store, homeschoolmadesimple.net/store, to get the HMS Essentials Bundle today. As homeschool parents, we need to know what we believe and why we believe it. If you aren't grounded in your why for homeschooling, it's going to be difficult to sustain this countercultural way of educating your kids. That's why we've put together a reading list for homeschool parents. This is a free list that pares down the books you need to read so you can easily continue your own education. Think of it as continuing ed for homeschool parents. Download the free reading list for homeschool parents at homeschoolmadesimple.net/parents, or click the link in the show notes. So when a child's older, like when they do the, I guess, PSAT, or kind of when they're doing older tests you
College
take when you're
board.
older, yeah, what do you kind of say about that?
Good question. So Dr. Moore used to say that those were the um, coin of the realm in education, and that he said, don't be ashamed or embarrassed to play the game with college boards. So he recommended, as I do as well, taking a prep test, like a prep course. I'm sorry, a prep course, like at a junior college, or you can do them online, I suppose, nowadays. But it's really important for your child to have test savvy, knowing that in a college board test, the way that the sections are laid out, the first part of each section are the hardest. Then the middle part is the next hardest. And then the ending are the ones that are like the Hail Mary pass. Like nobody's going to be able to get these, but you can. So what they explain in these classes is, so just do the beginning sections of all of them, then do the middle sections. Then if you still have time, you can jump into those really impossible ones and maybe you might get one. But if you get stuck in section 1 and think this is so impossible and you're paralyzed and you never go through the rest of the easy questions, you see, these are things that you wouldn't know just walking in off the street or getting dropped out of a spaceship. Who would know?
Right.
But take these classes, they're really, really helpful in just making you test smart. And then take the tests themselves multiple times, several times, not for where it doesn't really count, where you're not paying any money, but then also take it multiple times when you are, because just statistically, your scores will continue to rise
Hmm.
just by the familiarity and the confidence that you feel as you're, retaking it. And then the PSAT, of course, we take as many times as we want, but it only counts for the National Merit Scholarship the autumn of your junior year. So make sure that your kids are familiar with the test before they walk in on that. If you become a National Merit Scholar or even a National Merit Runner Up, every major college in America will be courting you with scholarship dollars.
Wow.
So it's a wonderful thing to have if you can pull that off. And because our kids test so well, there's no reason why we're not just grinding out National Merit Scholars.
Hmm.
So, and then the SAT, which I personally prefer to the ACT. I think the SAT is more of a reading test. And so homeschoolers, being readers, generally tend to do really well on the SAT.
Hmm.
And play it for all it's worth, use it as a lever to get into the school or the career, that you really feel that your child belongs in. It's just another tool, but it puts us on an equal playing ground. I was speaking with a parent the other day and they were telling me how smart their child was. And because I think maybe we were talking about really tough college or something. I can't remember the context of where I was like, well, yeah, you can try that. That sounds good, but I didn't know her child is a brand new family I've never worked with before. But then she told me, and he took his SAT and she told me what his score was. And I said, okay, yes. Now that's the great equalizer, because admissions offices, mommy and daddy are like, oh, Joey's so smart. And,
Mhm.
for all the books he's read, which of course definitely impresses them. But when they see your college board scores, now you've got their attention.
Mhm. Yeah. So then in a daily sort of rhythm of like just in normal life, when you're doing, what do you recommend people do? Like, what is the role of test taking and quizzes in a literature based education?
Mm. I'd say the role is very, very small. So it's a tutorial method. You are sitting face to face with your child. And now you're going to give him a test to see if he was engaging with what, he just was talking to you about 5 minutes before, and processing with you, and he's outside playing what you just read out loud to him, and all that. So
Mhm.
I don't see testing as a big part of our methodology. Some families feel that, well, how will we know? And I say to them, how you know is that you're practically breathing out of the same nostril all day long. Like you are completely, you're joined at the hip with your children. Trust me, when they're begging you for one more chapter, you know that they're engaging. When they talk about it, when daddy comes home for dinner and you say, kids, tell daddy what we read about in Door of the Wall today. And they're like, oh, dad, whoa. So Robin, he's in the monastery, and the monks, and they eat beef stew with marigolds in them like flowers. And then he was making this cross, and then he broke it, and you're sitting there going, he did not miss one detail of what I read. And here I thought he was just coloring while I was reading to him.
Mhm.
So I think it's more of a verbal communication. But having said that, I do not believe in legalistically making children recite what you've just read to them. I think that is a real killer of joy, and
Mhm.
it makes children not want to be read to at all. But if
Mhm.
just in the normal course of conversation, just like when you go to a great restaurant, or like I went to see the Reagan movie, which was filmed on my street and my house is in it and everything. It was really fun to see. And it was a marvelous, edifying movie that the Lord was really glorified in. And so, what did I do after I watched that movie? I told every person that I could grab on the street, you must go see this movie. Well, when a child's excited about a book, that's what they do. They talk about it. They bore you to
Mhm.
tears sometimes talking about it. But that's how we know whether a child is internalizing what we're exposing them to.
Which I guess if they're doing a math or something like that.
Different. Yes, of course. Good point, Rachel. I mean, math books and math programs come with testing built into them. So math is a subject you want to constantly be just kind of checking in on. Good point. I guess I'm so humanities thought. I'm always thinking about the humanities, but absolutely, math is not something that you get out of the ozone, and it
Mhm.
is something. Yes, and that's why John Saxon in his later, he wrote books for older kids. Now, the company's been sold, and I don't recommend the younger books, but starting at 6, 5, the whole idea is you repeat, you repeat, you repeat. And that is how you make sure that your child is maintaining what they've learned throughout the whole year, that they didn't forget what they learned by January, what they learned in September, but that it's all part of his rhythm. And so every day you're seeing how many, if you don't miss two, then you get to do the odds or the evens, is my methodology. So there's always that repetition that is checking for accuracy and hopefully speed as well.
Mhm. Yeah. That's great. Very good. Well, I think this is helpful for people to kind of get some bearings on testing and just feel like they can breathe and make some
Mm.
decisions with some confidence. So, thanks for
Yeah.
sharing.
One thing that I just thought of that a
Yeah,
lot of times
of
how my
course.
concern is on the day of testing in states where it's required, make it like a big party day, like eat a big fun meal that the kids will be excited about. Have like make it a party so that you deal with the expectation of testing in a positive way instead of a negative way.
Mm,
And children will pick this up from you. They've never been exposed to standardized testing. They have no.
mhm,
But if you're like, oh, tomorrow is your standardized test, and oh, I hope you do well, and praying and fasting in front of your children, wearing sackcloth. Oh, I just hope we don't go to jail after this test. That is just gonna obviously send a message to your child. This is something to be nervous about. But instead, put on your cheerleading costume and said, "You are gonna rock this. You are gonna just nail this. You are so smart, and this is going to be so fun." And I wouldn't necessarily tell your children the results other than just say you did great,
mm,
period.
mhm.
Make a big deal about it, but just make it positive, never negative.
Yes, and I think that maybe that is part of the problem or the instinctive kind of response for a lot of parents is then to kind of it brings up their anxiety
That's
because
right.
their reputation is on the line here, and then they start
Exactly.
to feel anxious and worried about it, and then that is what gets conveyed to the child, whereas, like you're saying, they have no understanding otherwise about testing. They have no reason to think that, oh, something's going to happen that's bad or whatever. And so then to just be able to make it to keep
Fun.
your anxieties to yourself
That's right.
and give them to God and let
Mhm.
it be just like, oh, this is a game we're playing, especially if it's the Peabody or something, oh, this is just a little game we're going to play and, you know,
It's gonna be
have fun
fun.
with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think of one little cute anecdote. Years and years and years ago, I was working with a family. I think they're in Minnesota, and their kids had been, I believe, in private school, and they're very, very burned out. And so they had horses and just a really lovely life. And so I said, let's just give your kids some time off. I want you to read to them, put them to hard manual labor out on the land and with the animals and everything. But yes, it was Minnesota because they have standardized testing that's required.
Mhm.
So the mom calls me up and she's like, "Oh, I'm so nervous. They're going to standardize testing." I'm like, "Oh, they'll do great. They'll do great." And so I'm out in the garage working, and the phone rings. and it's this mom, and she goes, "Carol, they all went up 3 grades in 1 year, and we didn't even do school." And I'm like, "Well, now wait a minute. You were doing school, but it didn't look like what they'd done, at the private school that they'd previously been so traumatized by." But it was like sometimes these standardized testing experiences are so encouraging because they're like, "Well, Carol says this works, but I don't know." They may all wound up, working, flipping burgers the rest of their lives. And then they get the test scores back and they're like, "Oh," so kind of it could be a blessing,
Totally.
affirming that what they're doing is working. So
Hmm.
it could be a very positive thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely what I saw with my friend when she went through it with her daughter. It ended up being like, okay, we're doing fine. everything is great.
It's awesome. It's a joy, it's a blessing, and it will just affirm that what you're doing is the right thing for your children. And not all children test well, but most homeschool children test better once they homeschool.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Homeschool Made Simple podcast. If you like what you heard in this episode, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcast or Spotify, or share this episode with a friend. It means so much when you help us spread the message of Homeschool Made Simple with others. Thanks for joining us this week on the Homeschool Made Simple podcast. Remember, Jesus' commandments are not burdensome. What he calls you to do, he will enable you to do. Blessings.